Rockets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the Jews was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killed. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. I've traveled, I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Oversight Live. I am Ben Carpenter, and I will be your host for this evening. What is Oversight Live, you might be asking? Well, Oversight Live is something that I created here not too long ago, a couple months ago, to address a problem that I saw. Well, Juneau, our state capital, for those that are not familiar with Alaska, is down in the panhandle, and you can only get to it by plane and by boat, by ferry. There's no road, so most Alaskans cannot drive very easily, or it's costly to get down there, and that's both in time and money. So providing oversight of our state government is something that is a bigger challenge for Alaskans than it is most other Americans. So there's lots of things that we don't know what goes on down there because of, we're not there. But there's a lot of technology that's at play nowadays for us to see what's happening and hear what's happening. So it's not a super valid excuse anymore about what's not going on, or not being able to keep tabs on your government, not being able to provide oversight. So that's what we're going to do. Well, I spent 6 years in the state legislature, and I'm going to do my best to bring you what I think is the priority. What are some things that I think you need to keep in mind, or see, or keep tabs on. And I'm going to provide that to you live. It's going to be the raw material, right? So you don't have to filter out any liberal media bias. You will have my bias. I'm a fiscal and social conservative, but I'm going to show you the raw thing here, right? I'm going to tell you where you can go to get the raw data, the raw video, if you want to go watch it yourself and double check me. So that's what I'm going to do. Largely, it's committee meetings and floor sessions, right? We might throw in a press conference here or there, or other things that pop up, but that's mostly what we're going to do. If you've got questions while we're watching, that's what the show is for. In your social media app, we're live streaming on YouTube, on Facebook, and X. If you got a question, pop it up in the chat, and I'll receive that, and I will do my best to answer those questions. If you're listening to the recording, you can send me an email at producer@oversightlive.com, and I will do my best to answer your email. This is the intent here, is to build community that is focused on providing factual oversight of our state government. There's too much going on down there to be able to bring everything in a sitting like this, in this forum, but we can try to prioritize what's going on and do what we can, right? So with that being said, we're going to try to have some fun, because who wants to sit through committee meeting after committee meeting? That's only for legislators and staff. No one wants to have to do that forever without having some fun. So we're going to have to try to have some fun here. And if I can, I'm going to fast forward through parts that we don't really need to worry too much about. But let's get to the meat and potatoes here. So continuing on the conversation of the LNG pipeline. Last week, we heard Senator Giesel who is the chair of Senate Resources, say that they were going to start having weekly meetings, and the topic is going to be the LNG pipeline. Okay. And I've already shared with you some of my concerns here. I've not only my concerns, but the raw data, what they've done, what this committee did to HJR 18, which stripped out any reference to this particular project that is being pushed along by Glenfarne, and instead replaced that language with a generic a project, speaks volumes to the committee members' intentions, or do they care whether this particular project succeeds, or are they just interested in some project, or do they really want to see this particular project succeed at all? So their Senate Resources took up this bill, Senate Bill 280, which is an oil and gas property tax, municipal tax bill. This is one that's been presented by the governor. We can take a look at that bill if people have questions about this specific bill, but they're gonna have a presentation today by Department of Revenue to go over in detail some of these tax questions. Okay, so I want to keep in mind, big picture here. If legislators wanted to kill the pipeline, let's just speculate here for just a real quick second. If there were ulterior motives here that said, we'd really like to keep the cost of energy high because that helps us with implementing wind and solar projects. Okay. If those two go hand in hand, high cost of gas, whether it's high cost of gas at the pipeline or high cost of imported gas, doesn't really matter. As long as we have high cost gas, it makes it easier and more competitive for wind and solar projects to get picked up. Okay. So if that's kind of in the background, you're not going to have legislators come right out and say, well, there's going to be political blowback if they come right out and say, well, we don't need this pipeline. Okay. So they're not going to do that. They're going to find some other way to make it so that it's just a natural consequence that the project doesn't go forward. Okay. So I'm looking at it from a perspective that says, I'm skeptical, and I'm looking at it from a perspective that says, do you really want this project? And if so, what are you willing to do to make sure that the project goes forward? What I think we're going to see in this meeting is the legislators are looking at it from a completely different perspective and saying, how much money can we get from this project? And that's the value that they see in the project. We just need to maximize the amount of money coming to the state through our power to tax. Okay. Two different philosophies here. I'm looking at the pipeline as being the biggest selling point for the pipeline. The biggest benefit that the pipeline brings is consistent supplies of gas to the rail belt for generations. And if we're able to export it, it becomes low cost gas. If we're not able to export it, then it's going to be gas that's probably just below the cost of importation of LNG. Okay. So it's not going to be cheap, but we'll have it. It'll be here for generations. Okay. The value to our economy, to the private sector, is that we don't have to worry about gas. The benefit to growth of the economy is low cost gas. So to the ability of the project to move forward with both a pipeline and an export facility gives Alaskans what they need, which is long-term supplies of North Slope gas and lower cost, because we're able to export that commodity. And through the exportation, it helps lower our in-state rates for that product. Now, as we've already heard, and I'm reminding us of something that we've already heard from consultants that the legislature has heard from. We've heard from Glenfarne. The taxation scheme that we have in place is going to provide revenue to the state, but it's at a point, it's at a level that is challenging for the project. Glenfarne has not said that that the project will not go forward. The state is making some assumptions. We'll hear this again, that if you don't adjust the taxes, then the project won't go forward. Okay. But those words have not come out of Glenfarne's mouth. But what Glenfarne has said is that your higher tax rates are going to result in higher cost gas to consumers. And it will increase the risk that partners in the project may step away. Okay. So that's the reality. That's what we've heard. Now we're going to watch a committee meeting where the leftists on the committee, who have already telegraphed through their modification of HJR 18 that they're not really a fan of this particular project. Now they're going to ask some specific tax related questions. Okay. So I hope I've teed this up correctly. I don't think that I'm forgetting anything pertinent here to the conversation. And we're going to listen to what these leftists have questions of the administration. Okay. So we're going to get to that. I'm going to check your comments here. Good evening, everyone. Hello. I see your comments. Brian asks a question, a technical question. Can't export also function as import? I don't build pipelines. My understanding is that the import facility that exists right now in Nikiski an export facility that exists in Nikiski can't also import. So you can make it an import facility, and that is what Hillcorp, who owns the facility now, and Chugach Electric, if I'm not mistaken, their partnership is looking to make that happen, to change or modify the physical structure that boats would tie up to allow the importation of LNG. Glenfarne and NSTAR have formed a cooperation, at least let's just say are cooperating to provide a import facility in conjunction with the export facility that that the LNG project has permitted. So you've got two kind of competing ideas as to where we could be importing LNG from, where we can't currently import. So there's no way to import right now. So if that's a solution to our state's problems, one way or the other, we have to modify or create a way to import LNG. So the answer is technically yes, but not right now, Brian. One thing. So Christopher is saying there are no ships that can ship LNG in the U.S. There are no ships. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Is this a Jones Act issue, or what are you referring to? Because if we couldn't get an LNG ship here, then they wouldn't be talking about importing LNG. So I think there's a way around or some way that we're able to provide ships into Cook Inlet for LNG. I mean, I know the ships physically come here. They had been coming here for many, many years, for decades. And we supplied Japan with LNG exports for several decades. Okay. So if the ship can come in to take on a load, it should be able to bring a load to us if the dock and the physical connection would allow the importation of LNG. And maybe it's not the dock so much as it is the apparatus in the plant or the facility that you need to be able to take it on from the ship. I don't know. I'm not a dock guy. I'm not a pipeline guy. I don't know the specifics on that. I just know that that's what they're working on and saying that that's what they're going to do. Brian says it makes sense to him to develop a facility that goes both ways. Well, I mean, if money's no object, yeah. If it's cost effective to do it both ways, then I guess that would give you maximum opportunity. But everything has a price tag, right? So if the only thing we're ever going to be doing is exporting LNG, then why would we need to import it? We don't import LNG if we've got massive quantities on the North Slope and a pipeline to export it. So why would you need to spend the money to create the import? But if that's not going to be possible in time, and we're going to need to import in the short term, then a facility that does both would make sense. And another point here is timing. How long does it take to get a new dock and a new facility built to be able to import LNG versus fix up the one that currently exists as an export facility and modify it to be an import facility as well? If timing is the issue, meaning the only reason we need to have LNG imported is because we're going to run out of other supply sooner than we can build a pipeline, then the one that the facility that gets built quickest is probably the one that we need to do. Which is an interesting dynamic because that's Hillcorp. They're not part of the LNG project. And so how does Glenfarne work out with Hillcorp to bring in LNG through their own port? And then how does our government bureaucracy allow the cost of those two projects to be borne by Alaskans through our rates? Or how does that, and that's a separate conversation. I'm going to pass that and we'll come back to it maybe if we need to later, but I'm specifically talking about the RCA and whether the RCA will allow the capital costs for the pipeline for the import facility to be passed on to consumers, which is a different conversation. Okay. Yeah, until we have the infrastructure to sell gas, we would be prepared to buy. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. Does having a facility that can both export and import allow you to take advantage of spot prices throughout the years? If there's an opportunity to buy low and then sell high later, if you've got that opportunity to import it and then at a later date export it again, I don't know. Maybe that's something that would be worthwhile as a strategy to be able to make some money or make revenue into the future. I don't know, just pure speculation right here. Okay, let's dive into taxes. Everybody's favorite thing to listen to or to consider, taxes. So we're specifically talking today about pipeline taxes, and we're specifically talking about the proposed change to a volumetric tax. Okay, and current tax rates versus what the bill would set up for a lesser tax rate. Okay, so that's the conversation that's going to go on in the meeting here. Okay, here is the meeting. Let us get moving with it. You need it bigger because that's not going to work. And Brian, your comments got to go away. All right, let's get going here. Okay, this is the start of the meeting. We'll listen until we've got till we've heard enough.
And myself, Senator Giesel. I expect Senator Clayman will be along shortly. We have a quorum to conduct business. Thank you, Heather and Susan, for keeping the minutes and running the audio for us. Today we have Senate Bill 280, Oil and Gas Property Tax, Municipal Tax, on the agenda. About 10 days ago, we started hearing this bill, going through the fiscal note and the presentation of it. We're going to continue that today. So I'm inviting to the table Mr. Dan Stickle. He is the Chief Economist, Tax Division of the Department of Revenue. And online is Ryan Farnsworth, Assistant Attorney General, Department of Law. He's there for questions. So I have asked Mr. Stickle, if, for the benefit of the public, particularly, to begin back on slide 10, which just is a brief overview of what property tax in Alaska looks like right now, and then proceed forward. I know there'll be a lot of questions, Mr. Stickle. You're used to that. So at the end of each slide, if you could pause.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
For the record, Dan Stickle, I'm Chief Economist with the Department of Revenue.
And we're going to be blessed tonight because although Dan can't answer every question that's going to be asked, right? Who can? Dan is probably arguably the best, if not one of the top 2 or top 5 people that I had the pleasure of working with and having sat across the table and asked questions with. Dan is a consummate professional, in my opinion, and knows his stuff. So we're blessed to have him in the state government and participating in this process.
So we will start back on slide 11, actually. It's a little bit of background on the property tax. So we've been talking through the bill, and this would provide some property tax benefits for the proposed Alaska natural gas pipeline project. And so start by talking about what is the property tax that we're providing the benefits against. So we as a state levy a property tax on the value of all oil and gas property in the state. That state is 20 mills or 2% of assessed value. The assessment for oil and gas property is done centralized through the Department of Revenue. Any municipal property taxes are allowed as a credit against that state tax. So for all oil.
Okay, so let me pause here. If you watched previous episodes, we learned from Glenn Farn that one of the reasons that they recommended or want to move to this volumetric tax is to reduce the risk of litigation in the project going forward over the tax rate. And it's not over the tax rate, it's over the tax valuation. Okay, so what Dan just told us is that the state manages the appraisal process. And that is the appraisal process is what would be litigated. So the rate will remain the same, but the amount of money that the company would then owe, or that outside interests think the company should be paying more, would sue the state based on their appraisal value. And then it would go to the courts to determine whether the appraisal is appropriate or not. And so there is the cost, and there's the time delay and all of that. And you've got 4 different municipalities. How many entities out there might have an opinion on and deep pockets to sue the project over the evaluations, the appraisals that the state does, right? And so the Glenn Farn has said, you know what, we want to reduce, if you want to reduce risk to the project, then you do away with that property tax concept altogether, and you move to a volumetric tax where you just tax based on the volume, the throughput of the pipeline, and you don't have to worry about any sort of appraisals or conflicts over opinions on what the value of the equipment is or the infrastructure that should be taxed, right? So keep that in mind, that's one of the reasons why we've got this concept with the valuation tax.
Oil and gas property in the state, the tax rate is 2% of assessed value each year, or 20 mills. The LNG plants, which would be part of the Alaska natural gas project, those are not part of the definition of taxable property for state purposes. So currently LNG plants are not subject to state property. They would be subject to municipal property tax.
Very good. I see no questions, so I'll let you proceed.
Moving on to what the proposed legislation does on slide 13. So the current 2% or 20 mills property tax has been identified as an economic burden on the economics of the project, which decreases the value of that project to developers and increases the cost of delivering gas. And so what the governor has proposed is to replace the entire property tax, both state and local, on the Alaska LNG project with an alternative tax. So there would be an alternative volumetric tax that would apply after a ramp-up period, and that the rate of that tax was kind of set to be roughly equivalent to a 2 mills or 0.2% property tax.
Okay, let's keep in mind this statement here that you see: increasing costs of delivered gas upon project completion. Okay. Current tax, 20 mils, 2% tax would increase the costs of delivered gas. That's to you and me. That's to exported customers. Okay. So if one of the things that is holding the project back is the cost of the gas, or in other words, if you as the Alaskan consumer want to have the lowest cost gas, then you have to weigh something in your mind and realize that this is the situation. If you're demanding, on one hand, you're demanding as much revenue as possible to state government, and on the other hand, you're demanding the lowest possible cost gas, then you're going to have a conflict that you're going to have to find a happy medium over, because you can't have you can't have low cost gas and high tax rate. It is, you can't have that. So you're going to have to make an adjustment here. You're going to have to, what are you comfortable with? The amount of money that you raise on revenue and the amount of money that you're going to pay personally for oil or for a gas service, right? Knowing that if you increase the tax rate here, the amount of tax that's going to be paid by the project, then the project is just going to pass that cost on to some consumer. And that is what we heard from Glenn Farn. You want to keep that cost down, then lower all of the factors that go into raising the cost of that gas. That is why high tax rate, and we're going to hear this here when it compares it to other jurisdictions, that is why the high tax rate, the 22% tax, why it's being labeled here as being difficult for the project, because it increases the cost of the gas, the commodity that's going to be exported or sold locally. One more thing. Assess whether your elected representatives are concerned about that part, increasing the cost of delivered gas. This matters, okay? In the questions that are being asked, is the so what, or the thing that they're getting at, focused on increasing the appeal of the project so that it can go forward? Is it focused on figuring out what the right balance is and providing low cost gas? Or is it something else? Okay. I think that if you're sending your representative down to Juneau, that you would expect them to be thinking about the rest of Alaskans and paying as low of cost of gas as possible as the byproduct of this project. And I think most people are going to look at it and say that is the greater value than the dollars that the state government is going to make off of taxes. Does it matter to you, consumer, if the state makes a lot of money off taxes, but you pay a high dollar for gas? Does that help you? Or would you rather have less cost gas and the state generate less revenue off of the project? Because you can't have it both ways. You cannot have low cost gas and high taxation. Those two levers do not work together. You can't have high taxes and low cost. So let's see where their headspace is.
The project is at full capacity.
Thank you. I want to recognize Senator Clayman has joined us. I also want to recognize that Senator Merrick has joined us in the audience. Thank you. I'll let you go on.
So moving on to slide 14. So again, there's the bill has a ramp up period. So the entire project would start out as exempt from property taxes. There would be a ramp up period. It would be either 10 years or after the project reaches 1 billion cubic feet per day of throughput. And so that's kind of when the billion cubic feet per day is roughly when the export portion of the project would come online with the first full LNG train. After the end of that ramp up period, there would be the alternative volumetric tax. That would be set at 6 cents per 1,000 cubic feet of throughput in the project, and then there would be a 1% annual increase on that rate. So at the second year, the rate would be 6.06 cents per 1,000 cubic feet, and so on. And then that levy would be split between the state and the municipalities. The state would collect the state portion of the alternative tax, and the municipalities would collect the municipal portion of that tax.
Yes, Senator Wilkowski.
Thank you. What percentage of the project is on state land versus in municipal land?
Sure, Senator Wilkowski through the chair. I believe I have that information in the fiscal note. So about 36.5% of the pipeline is assumed to be on state land, and about 12.2% of the entire project. Those are rough numbers that we use for modeling based on our assumptions of the share of capital cost between the various components of the project.
So
Follow up,
can
Senator
you
Wilkowski.
explain? Thank you. Can you explain that distinction? 36.5% on state land versus 12.2% of entire project. Is that the when you say 12.2%, is that the value of the entire project?
Sure, Senator Wilkowski through the chair. So what we've done for modeling purposes is we've assumed that the 6 cents per 1,000 cubic feet would allocate based on the share of capital expenditure that we are assuming for each of those components of the project. Now, once the bill is passed, we would develop regulations. This is one possible way that we would do those regulations. In our modeling, looking at the full value of the expected capital expenditure, about 12.2% of the full spend is expected to be attributed to the share of the pipeline that's in the unorganized borough, which is where the state would receive its share of the alternative volumetric tax, with the remainder in the municipalities. And looking just at that pipeline portion, it's 36.5, or a little over 1/3 of the value of the pipeline would be in the unorganized borough.
All right, I don't see
Just-
further. Yes, Senator
And I
Wilkowski.
see you do reflect that in a couple of slides later, but how is TAPS allocated? Is that kind of a similar allocation?
Sure, Senator Wilkowski through the chair. So for TAPS, it is a centrally assessed valuation within Department of Revenue. The valuation there, so there's the pipeline component, and we look at the amount of the pipeline that goes through each municipality. There's also more than just pipe itself. There's compressor stations, which are another significant portion, and other equipment. So roughly mileage is a good rough estimate, but then you also have to look at where the various compressor stations are located. And we do that in our modeling for the AKLNG project as well.
Follow up,
No, it's fine.
Senator Kawasaki.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. A question I had is that I'm interested in the spur line, interested in straddle plant, and then associated facilities. What part of that would be tax exempt?
Sure, Senator Kawasaki through the chair. So the legislation is for the AKLNG project itself. That currently does not include the Fairbanks spur line. So the alternative volumetric tax and the exemptions would apply to the main line, and then the spur line would be separate.
Follow up, Senator Kawasaki.
Sure. And then, so the associated facilities along with that particular line would include a straddle plant and probably a compression. Is that somewhere in here, indicated somewhere in this bill?
Sure, Senator Kawasaki through the chair. So the bill itself deals with the main AKLNG project. Currently does not include provisions for the Fairbanks spur line.
Okay, that's good enough. Thanks.
Senator Clayman.
On the 1% increase from 6 cents to 6.06 cents, is there a cap when that 1% increase stops, or does this 1% increase go on as long as there's gas going through?
Yeah, Senator Clayman through the chair. So the 1% adjustment would take place each year based on the prior value into perpetuity.
Senator Myers.
Thank you. So going back to the Fairbanks Spur, if I'm understanding you correctly, effectively you're saying that the current tax law would apply to the Fairbanks Spur, so that if the Fairbanks Borough wanted their residents to get a lower price on the gas because it's going to get directly passed on, it wouldn't do any good to create a local borough exemption, because then the money would there would just be less money going to the borough and more money going to the state. Is that accurate?
Senator Myers through the chair. That's my understanding. Yes. So the spur line is currently not carved out in this bill and be treated under current law.
Okay. And then follow up,
Senator Myers.
Yeah, thank you. So then if IGU owned the spur, which is a borough owned entity, would that then make the spur tax exempt to the state?
Senator Myers through the chair. I may call on a lifeline here. I do have some Department of Law available to talk about the specifics of exactly where the line gets drawn in property tax.
So online we have Ryan Farnsworth. He is with the Department of Law. There's also David Herbert, commercial analyst, tax division, and Matt Kissinger. So you're thinking Mr. Farnsworth would be appropriate. Mr. Farnsworth, welcome. If you would introduce yourself and answer Senator Myers' question.
Thank you through the chair. This is Ryan Farnsworth, AAG with the Department of Law. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question about the Fairbanks spur line.
Okay.
Senator Myers?
Well, I guess just in general, is something, if any oil and gas type property was owned by, I mean, you already got IGU, is owned by the borough, does that automatically make it tax exempt from the state?
I don't know. I'd have to look at that. Thank you through the chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farnsworth. If you would dig into that and respond in writing to the committee, we will just, my office will distribute it to the rest of the committee. Next up is Senator Rauscher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So through the chair, I was wondering how many munis are collecting tax from taps?
Senator Rauscher through the chair. So I believe it's 4, or primarily 4.
And
Follow up, Senator Rauscher.
are they all collecting the same mill rate, I guess? Is that how we asked the question? I don't know.
Sure, Senator Rauscher through the chair. So no, the mill rate is different. So the way it works for TAPS is there is a 20 mil tax that's levied by the state, and then each municipality that has a portion of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in it levies their municipal rate. And the municipal, whatever they pay to the municipality is allowed as a credit against the state tax. However, a municipality has to charge the same tax rate on the oil and gas property that they charge to all other property. So the various municipalities have different municipal rates on their share of TAPS. And then the owner of TAPS pays the 20 mils regardless.
Follow up, Senator Rauscher.
So before this bill would take place, it would be similar for the gas line?
That's correct, Senator Rauscher.
All right, thank you.
Senator Clayman.
Following up, when you talked about the 4 municipalities or local governments that collect from TAPS, in that instance, are we specifically talking about the pipeline as opposed to Alaska, which may be paying property tax to Anchorage, even though Anchorage doesn't have, even if the pipeline doesn't go through Anchorage? Are the 4 where the pipeline goes through?
Sure, Senator Clayman through the chair, and there may be a small amount of ancillary liability going to other municipalities, but I was looking primarily at the municipalities that this line would go through also, which would be starting in the North Slope Borough, passing through the Fairbanks Borough, the Matsu Borough, and then the Kenai Peninsula, primary 4 impacted.
And which are the 4 municipalities that collect from TAPS today? The ones you were referencing?
Those are the 4 I was referencing, Senator Clayman through the chair.
Thank you.
All right, I see no further. Senator Dunbar?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Wouldn't it be Valdez, not Kenai for the TAPS?
Valdez, yeah.
Should be 3.
Yeah. Senator Dunbar through the chair, that would be correct. Yes,
Okay.
Apologize for the misspeaking.
No worries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I see no further questions. We'll go on to slide 15, actually 16.
All right. And Madam Chair, to Senator Meyer's question, I think I know the answer off, but I wanted to be sure before putting that on the record. So we will get back to you with the details on that question. All right. So that went through the kind of what does this bill do? And then we were going to walk through the official fiscal note. And I believe when I was here, was it last week? There was some confusion around the fiscal note. There was a fiscal note with an indeterminate number that had been provided. That was due to a technical error in somewhere along the fiscal note system, going from when we turned it in to when it showed up on your desk. There should be numbers on the front of the fiscal note. I believe an updated version has been provided.
Yes, that is accurate. We have an update from Department of Revenue. We also have a DCCD fiscal note. I have asked, just for committee members' information, Department of Natural Resources, if there was a fiscal note from their department, and they said no, they need no additional staff related to this bill. Just informational for you. All right, Mr. Sickle, I'll let you proceed.
All right, so moving on to slide 16. So this just talks about our process in putting the fiscal note here together. So we are showing a positive fiscal note here. The assumption here is that if the project would not go forward without property tax relief, and so any revenue is better than no revenue. And so what we're showing here is the positive impact of the alternative volumetric tax. The fiscal note convention is that we are only showing the revenue associated directly with the tax that's being changed in the fiscal note. So what you're seeing on the front of the fiscal note is the revenue from the alternative volumetric tax in the first 2 years that it's in place. And then we do have substantial supplemental information that looks more holistically at what would the project generate under current law if it went forward. What would the benefits be under this proposal, looking more broadly, including production tax, royalties, things like that.
Okay, let me pause there for just a second, because I think this conversation needs to have some explanation here. Let me pull up this other document. Okay, folks, this is the fiscal note. So let's just talk about this for just a second here. I got to make it bigger because that's not going to do you any good. Okay, that's about as big as it needs to be here. Okay, so 2 things that I want to share right off the bat. You got to make sure that you're talking apples and apples with regard to fiscal notes. They get updated sometimes, and you don't want to be referencing one when you're not looking at the updated version. I just pulled this off of the website for Senate Bill 280. They did not identify the component number, or they didn't tell us which fiscal note is the most recent version. Okay. So in order to identify the fiscal note, you're looking at from who the fiscal note's from. And there's this component number that I always looked at to make sure that the component number matched. Okay. Also, little tidbit here, this control code down at the bottom right-hand corner is another one of those codes that you can verify that you're talking apples and apples, that the fiscal note that the department's talking about is the same one that you have sitting before you as a legislator or as a public, right? So if you want to know, they should be telling you Department of Revenue fiscal note dated 3/20/26 or OMB component number 2476 or I've never saw them or heard them talk about this identifier number. We did talk about this control code down at the bottom, which would identify the particular fiscal note that you're supposed to be looking at. Okay. So that's just for housekeeping. Make sure that you've got the right fiscal note sitting in front of you. It does get confusing, especially when you're looking at a bill that has multiple fiscal notes from different departments. Okay. So if a department has an impact by a particular policy bill, and there's going to be a cost associated with it, either it's going to cost them or it's going to generate revenue, then they need to put forward this fiscal note to educate the legislature on what it is actually going to cost. What is the cost of the bill? This is an estimate of what the administration is saying it's going to cost. Okay. Here's what I found. For bills that the administration wants to see pass, you have a fiscal note that is written in terms in which it shows, how do I say this? It can present a picture that is rosy. Let's just put it that way. If there is a fiscal note that the administration doesn't want to see passed, you might see a fiscal note that looks expensive, maybe more expensive than it needs to. It's all in how you write it. Okay. So you've got the numbers section of the fiscal note right here. And these are numbers that some human put in there, right? But you also have this analysis and written justification for your fiscal note. And sometimes you can read through this and realize, or just start asking questions. You're like, does it really need to be that expensive? And the administration can put forward its own worst case scenario of how much this is going to cost the state versus a best case scenario on how much this is going to make the state or how little it's going to cost us, right? For example, this is only templating to have one additional person, full-time position. So the state only needs today, as we're looking at this bill, the state only needs to hire one person. Okay. The state could always come back next year and say, oh, well, we kind of need an assistant for this person because there's a lot of work. But we're not going to put that on the original fiscal note. We're just going to say we won't project that. Okay. It's a discretionary thing. This is the sense that I get from being in the legislature is fiscal notes have to be taken with a little bit of grain of salt because they're a projection or an estimation of what they think the bill is going to cost the state. And there is definitely a bias from the author of the fiscal note. Okay. Reading the fiscal note really quickly. I want to get back to the meeting, but you've got your title and all your sponsor information and stuff up front there. And then you've got the numbers section here that usually talks about what the current budget year appropriation request is and what's included in the governor's request. And then you've got these years that are looking out. They're called out year costs. So this is an attempt to say, here's the current budget cost, right, on the far left-hand side. And then in the additional out years in the future, this is what we think it'll cost every year going forward. Okay. So then 27, 28, 29, 30, fiscal year 31, 32. So we're only looking out till fiscal year 32 with regard to this bill. Okay. Personnel services, that's what you're hiring. So you look down here at this full-time position, and that one person you're going to be hiring is a $147,000 a year. Again, these are in thousands of dollars. That's how you read this. So $147,500 for personnel services, $5,000 for travel, another 13, 9, 14,000 for services, and then 4 for commodities. That's what the total cost of the bill is in this current budget. Okay. So personal services, that's your pay and bennies. So total budget impact is 170. It's going to cost the state $170,000. Right. The funding source, all 170,000 in this current year's budget is going to come from the general funds. And there's no changes in revenue sources here. Okay. For the out years, there's a template that cost is going to decrease. Why is it decreasing? The commodities cost is not going to be necessary for 3 years, and then it picks back up at 1.5 for out years. So I don't know. I mean, we're talking $4,000. I don't know what the rationale is here, but relatively speaking, from sitting on finance, I'm not worried about $4,000. Like that's a rounding error. It's not a big deal. All right. So 170,000 to 166,000. You can see that the personnel services line stays the same. Do you think that this person who gets hired is never going to get a raise in 5 years? 5 or 6 years? I think that's unlikely. I think it's highly likely that whoever you hire here is going to have an increase in pay. That's what we do with employees. We pay them more. They do a good job. They do a bad job. They get paid more if they stay with the state. So this 147.5 likely to go up in the future, but we're not going to template that. We're not going to tell you, we're not going to factor it in as a factor of this bill, because why would we do that? Because then it would look like it gets more expensive going forward. So we're just going to make an assumption that an average pay or whatever, however we coach it, we just say the pay is going to stay the same. You know it's not. You know it's not. Okay. Quickly here. If there's a supplemental cost associated, meaning the fiscal year 26 budget that we just passed earlier, like we're in the current fiscal year, is there a supplemental cost of this current fiscal year with the bill? No, there's not. Is there a capital cost associated with the bill? Well, yes, there is. $250,000. Separate capital appropriation required. Okay, so now I'm going to look at that. I'm going to try to find that answer down in the written section to find out why that capital cost is required. Because that capital cost is not going to be in this number section. And why is it not? Because this is operating expenditures. This is only for the operating budget. This line here is for your capital budget. So you can expect that there's a $250,000 ask going to be in the capital budget for this bill. Does the bill create or modify a new fund? No. Does the bill direct or will the bill result in regulation changes adopted by your agency? Yes. Okay. So maybe there's costs associated with that, right? Okay. And then there could be an explanation for version changes of the bill. Okay. I want to get back to the meeting, so I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you can go. Did I show you where to find the fiscal note? That would be important for you. This is the written portion of the bill estimating the cost and further explaining the dollar figures that you see there. Okay. Don't bypass this. I mean, we're going to today for the interest of time, but this is often where I learn more about the cost of the bill in this background information than I do in the numbers section here. Okay. So don't ignore this portion. Okay. All right. So that's what they're talking about when they're talking about the fiscal note. Okay. Let's go back to the meeting here. I'll get to your question here in just a second. Let me tee this up. Okay, Lisa asks, what is TAPS? Excellent question. You always assume, it's easy to assume that everybody understands what you're talking about when you're talking about acronyms. TAPS stands for Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. So we're talking, when someone says TAPS, they're talking about the oil pipeline that already exists. Okay. So Senator Wielechowski was asking questions about the state's tax laws concerning the oil pipeline that is already existing and that the gas pipeline will sit right next to for the majority of the trip south from the North Slope. Okay. Oil pipeline taxes and economics for an oil pipeline are different than the economics for a gas pipeline. But they're asking the question because they want to understand what how the state approaches the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System with regard to taxes. Okay. Good question. Thank you for asking. Okay, let's get back to hearing what they got to say here.
Yes, Senator Wielechowski.
Do you know what the breakdown was between the state share and the local share under the Municipal Advisory Gas Project Review Board annual report in 2015?
Senator Wielechowski, through the chair, I'm sure I have it in my files. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Is 40% for the state sound about right?
Senator Wielechowski, through the chair.
I still don't know. I still don't know.
Is there anybody online that might recall?
So the question is going before Mr. Farnsworth, Mr. Herbert, and Mr. Kissinger. Do any of you have an answer to Senator Wielechowski's question?
14.
Okay, so here is a point where we really need to understand why Senator Wielechowski's asking this question. Okay, and he's motivated to ask the question. It has nothing to do with the presentation. It is additional information and additional perspective, and it kind of helps us understand where he's coming from his perspective about what case he's trying to build here, right? And they're trying to build a case.
Yes, Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to sort of re-ask a question I asked the last time we had you before us, Mr. Stickle. And perhaps there's been more evidence. It's been a while since I asked this question. So you assume that the reduction from mill rate to 2 mills is positive because that's what helps the AKLNG go forward. It wouldn't go forward without it. So my first question is, what is the data that you're relying on for that assumption? And the second is, if we alter this bill before us from 2 mills to, let's say, 18 mills, would the department still assume that the pipeline went forward?
Senator Dunbar, through the chair. So to the first part of the question, the assumption that the project would not go forward that's what went into the fiscal note. That is an assumption. As to where you would draw the line if you had an 18 mil tax, that would be something that we would take a look at and discuss and decide what to put in a future fiscal note.
Follow up, Senator Dunbar.
Well, question first for the committee. Can you get I actually know the question is, can I get a fiscal note on a proposed amendment?
Mr. Stickle, the proposed amendment would have to be before the committee and actually adopted before you'd have to get a fiscal note. Am I correct?
Chair Giesel, I believe that's the process.
So can I have a follow-up question?
Follow up, Senator Dunbar.
If I proposed 18 amendments or 17 amendments going from 3 mills to 20 mills, at what point would the department stop assuming that there'd be a positive impact on the state?
Senator Dunbar, through the chair, it's a fascinating question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. We have to think about that.
We do need to think about that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Senator Rauscher.
So obviously what Senator Dunbar is telegraphing here is that we don't believe, well, let me say this. We don't want a chance that doing nothing, meaning don't pass the bill, leave the tax as is, would kill the project. Okay. If we do that and that kills the project, then we've got mud on our hands here, blood on our hands, mud in our face, whatever the right analogy is here. We caused this to happen, right? So what is the highest possible tax that we could put in place in the current regime of property tax and the project get labeled as feasible or it would go forward with that tax. It won't go forward with a 20 mils. Will it go forward with 18 mils or 19 mils? 18.75, right? This is the thing that he and others are trying to figure out is, you know what? Fine. You say 20 mils is not going to work. Well, we'll just drop it, but we'll leave the property tax in place. We won't go to a volumetric tax and we'll leave it in place. Okay. So we don't want to get blamed for killing the pipeline, because if we keep the 20 mils, see, that's the starting point. 20 mils equals pipeline doesn't go forward. Okay. Can we get you to say that if we dropped it to 19 mils, then you'll say pipeline's going to go forward? Great. If the pipeline's going to go forward and it's at 19 mils, then we're good. We'll just change that and we'll move forward. And if the pipeline doesn't go forward, then it's not because of any action we took, right? This is the game of chicken, or the poker game that's at play here, because you're not going to know. Your paid consultants have come in and said, you've got to adjust your current tax regime to make this project feasible. Glenfarne is coming in and saying, we need to adjust the tax regime to make this project feasible. Here is a way that we think we could do this, and the state still receive tax revenue, and we reduce the risk. Remember, the move to a valuation tax is not just about the tax rate, the money. It is about eliminating or reducing the risk of lawsuits. If they drop the mill rate, as Senator Denbar is telegraphing here of what he the amendments he might be offering, if you're just going to drop the rate to 18 mils, right, 1.8% of whatever the valuation is, then you haven't done anything to address the valuation. And that's where the lawsuits are going to come from. Lawsuits aren't necessarily going to come from the 1.8%, right? The question, the percentage, that's legislative discretion. They can set that percentage at whatever they want. What is bureaucratic is the assessment on the value of the land. It's arbitrary. The state government is going to come up with a dollar figure. And so now you can sue over that. And suing over that is what the Glenfarne and the project wants to prevent, because that increased costs and length of time that this might be caught up in lawsuits, waiting for that to be resolved before they can go forward. Or the investors don't want to execute on an investment if they don't know what the outcome of the lawsuit's going to be, right? So the whole point here is that the move to the volumetric tax is not just about reducing the mills, it's also about reducing the risk.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through the chair. So the first bullet, the revenue impact of this bill is positive because it assumed that the Alaska LNG project will not proceed without property tax relief. That would also account or actually include all the municipalities, that it would be positive for all of them because it assumes that the project will not go forward without it.
Senator Rouser, to the chair, that's correct. And
Thank
again,
you.
this is an assumption that went into the fiscal note. And we do present a variety of analysis so that, folks can draw their own conclusions.
There are charts that show different sensitivities further on in the presentation. So we probably don't want to get too bogged down on slide 16, but Senator Wielechowski, questions?
Yeah. Did Glenfarne tell you they wouldn't build this pipeline or this project without this 6-cent number?
Senator Wielechowski, through the chair, so they did not make that as an absolute definitive statement. Did indicate that the property tax under current law is challenging to the project, and then that's what we've heard from AGDC and consultants as well.
Would you like to ask that question to Mr. Kissinger, Senator Wilkowski? He is online.
Sure.
Mr. Kissinger, Senator Senator
Chair
Wilkowski.
Giesel.
Senator Wilkowski has a question.
I was just curious if because we keep hearing that there was an assumption that the project wouldn't go forward unless we did this 6 cent per 1,000 cubic feet number. And I'm just curious if that's the number that Glenn Farn had asked for.
Senator Wilkowski through the chair, and this is Matt Kissinger for the record. No, this number came about through our benchmarking with other regimes, other areas, other tax regimes, both within the U.S. and internationally, and seeing that we were about one full order of magnitude higher than them, meaning 10 times higher. And so that's where the original amount came from. Glenn Farn have never stated to us, that they will not do the project without this legislation. But in our own analysis that began as far back as 2020, when we did our economic stage gate, property tax was identified as one of the most significant levers after gas price and potentially the loan guarantees, and really on the order of magnitude of the loan guarantees, an impact to the project. We know that companies have not been clamoring to come and do this project, and it is a difficult project that has had to be finessed in order to get a developer to move as far as Glenn Farn have with it. And so the belief is that in order to manage the magnitude of cost overrun risks that this project faces, and in order for the developer to take that on, there needs to be sufficient room or headroom within their returns for that to make sense. And so this is all about making sufficient headroom within those returns so that they can manage the project, including its cost overrun risks.
Okay, if you're sitting at that table and you don't care whether the Glen Farm project moves forward or not, and you would be perfectly acceptable for it to not move forward and move to a next some other project, you would have some other person or entity come forward, some other company come forward and say, hey, we want to do this. Yeah, so sorry that Glen Farm couldn't make it work. We think we can do it now. Or if you're just okay with importing LNG, or you think that you're going to get more gas from Cook Inlet. And I'm just thinking of the alternatives here, because if you don't buy into this, if you do not have the belief, right? That's what he said. If you don't have the belief that your 20 mils, that your current tax rate is actually something that's going to prohibit the project from going forward, if it's actually going to prohibit it, if you don't believe that, or you want to find this dollar figure, this number right below it that says, okay, 20, the project doesn't go forward, 19, it doesn't go forward, 18, it doesn't go forward, 17, can we get 17 and a half, and then it'll go forward? We're looking for this number. Well, if you never find that number, but you just pick a number that you kind of think that this is what we believe. You believe that, we believe this, and then you go forward with that, then who's to argue? Like, it's a belief question, okay? Glen Farm then says, okay, fine. We can't go to the investors that we thought we were going to go to. Now we're going to go to higher cost investors. We have higher risk of project now, because we're sticking with a project that we know we're going to get sued over the valuation of the property tax assessments. Okay. So there's higher risk. We were going to go to pensions and low cost money. Now we're going to high cost money. It's going to increase the cost of the project and increase the cost of gas. You got more taxes, so that increases the cost of gas, but we can go forward with the project. So in reality, the people sitting at the table here, they're able to go back to their constituents and say, we got the most money that we got for our state. They wanted to get it all the way down to 0.2%, 2 mils. We stuck it to them. We got that big oil company, that big gas company to give the state more. What's the byproduct? The byproduct is a more costly gas. It's a more costly project. Your pocketbook, your personal pocketbook, your business pocketbook, it costs you more. Because these characters sitting at the table think that the state needs to have more revenue off of this project. It's a belief question. It's just a balance. We got to pick a number, and we think that we can get more out of this project. Okay, well then the byproduct is a higher cost project. That's what it's going to be. And it's not just a tax, right? Going back and reiterating what I'm saying. It's not just because we're increasing or settling on a higher tax than what this bill allows. It's also because the risk for lawsuits goes up. That means your capital costs go up, and the overall project gets more costly. Okay.
Senator Wilkowski.
So
yes,
is it based strictly on a comparison of property tax relief or property taxes that gas lines pay in other jurisdictions? Is that fundamentally where you came up with this number?
Senator Wilkowski, through the chair, more looking at LNG projects, competing LNG projects, and the property tax burdens that they faced.
Senator Wilkowski.
And I know there have been tax incentives in other states like Texas and Louisiana and Oklahoma, but I'm curious if when you looked at those property tax relief that was granted, you also looked at other taxes that the companies had to pay, like sales tax or gas tax or maybe corporate income tax or other things that would cause costs to be higher in those jurisdictions.
Senator Wilkowski, through the chair, we had gas strategies do the first full benchmarking on this. So we've also had WoodMac look into it, and I think you have your own analysis from Gaffney Klein that highlights property tax as one of the biggest obstacles. The gas strategies assessment did look at overall take, but then narrowed down just on property taxes. Overall take in Alaska is also quite high. More difficult to benchmark with the foreign ones where you have most of these regimes under production sharing agreements, but certainly higher than in Texas.
Senator Wilkowski.
Has there been any talk about, or are you aware that of any likelihood that the federal government may subsidize a portion or all of this project?
Senator Wilkowski, through the chair, as I mentioned when we did the economic stage gate, one of the three levers that we identified was the federal loan guarantees, which originated from the Alaska Natural Gas Pipeline Act of 2004. Those were originally written for a pipeline to deliver gas down to the North American market. And those were amended with the bipartisan infrastructure law to be used on this project. That is the route that we've looked into for federal support of the project. So the existing legislative support.
Senator Wilkowski.
So you're not anticipating that there could be a federal subsidy of this project?
Senator Wilkowski, through the chair, what we are looking at, no, we're not. No, I'm not. We are looking for, the project to stand on its own legs absent that. And we believe that the project does, provided that we optimize it in these ways. Again, lowering the gas price, which we already have worked on, getting the loan guarantees, which we've already achieved to some degree, and finally the property tax changes.
Senator Wilkowski.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're familiar with the MAG report, the municipal advisory Gas Project Review Board, they did a pretty extensive report in 2015. That was when the producers were contemplating a pipeline. And at that time, there was a tentative agreement by the producers, who were the constructors of the project, to provide a construction pilt of $800 million over the 5-year construction period, and then another, I believe, $600 to $800 million per year in property taxes. And so this is a really significant decrease in the amount that the local communities would get and the state would get. There's no impact funds at all under this proposal that you have in front of us. So we're going from 800 to 0 on that, and then we go from 600, I believe, to 800 million per year to $74 million per year. And I'm just curious why that's a pretty drastic drop. And I think and that's going back to 2015. So that's 11 years ago. When you factor in inflation, that's even a bigger drop. And I'm curious why the producers would have agreed to that back then, tentatively at least. And there's such a dramatic drop now.
Senator Milikowski, through the chair, I would just point to the lack of success of that endeavor.
Outstanding answer. This is complete nonsense. Okay. Senator Wielkowski is trying to pull a fast one. He's trying to say that negotiations or conversations that were happening with the producers back when the major producers were the owners of the project, and they were having these conversations with the state government, that they agreed to something. You and I were not there in part of that conversation. There's probably no record of those conversations. And there certainly was no agreement. He said, at least tentatively. Okay, so there's not really agreement. It's just a conversation that was being had, right? Okay. Don't miss this major point. Those producers decided not to do that. They decided to not participate in this project. They quit. They said, it's yours, state. We're not going to play by those numbers. It's not cost effective for us. We can't make money. We want 18% return on investment. This is not going to give us 18% return on investment, or whatever number it was, right? Glenfarne comes in and says, okay, well, we can do it. I think the number that was thrown out in another meeting was 10%. Okay. So their making money number is 10%. So if the cost of this business arrangement, if this project goes up through taxation and through litigation and through higher costs of the money that's necessary to pay for it, right? If all of those costs go up and the company's profit margin, their target of 10% interest, or making 10% here on profit, if that goes down, then at some point in time, Glenfarne's got to say, well, 10% is what we said we needed, but we're okay with 9, or we're okay with 8, or maybe 7.75, right? This group of people right here wants to be able to go to Glenfarne and say, well, we're going to come off our tax position, but you're going to come off your profit position. So you can't get 10%. You're going to get 9 or 8%, and we're going to get more in taxes. That's what those leftists want to say on this committee. That's the end result that they want. Glenfarne is making too much profit. This is envy. This is the human aspect of envy. These people are greedy, and they're greedy on your behalf. They're going to point to the Constitution and say, well, the Constitution gives us this burden and this responsibility to maximize the value of this pipeline. So maximizing the value of the pipeline to us means we've got to ask for the most taxes that we can get. Okay. Well, we've already covered tonight that the value of the pipeline to you and I is not necessarily in the tax that's being raised and goes to state government. It's the fact that we can have low cost gas for generations. That's what you and I and our businesses care about. That's what prosperity cares about in the state of Alaska. And if that prosperity, work with me here for a second. Let me make this bigger so you can see my eyes. If that prosperity leads to more revenue to the state, then you can make up the difference in reducing the cost to the project through a lower cost tax rate in future growth in your economy. No one here is going to talk about that. But that is a reality that should be factored into this. But it's a belief thing, right? How are you going to prove what the economy is going to grow if you have consistent supplies of natural gas? It's a belief thing. Okay? It's also those people sitting at that table need to care whether that economy grows. Those people have constituents that are electing them regardless of whether the economy grows, because they're benefiting government. Many or most of their elections, people are electing them to come down here and increase government spending. They're leftists. Even the chair, who calls herself a Republican, she's for increased spending. So their focus is on growing government, and you grow government by additional revenue. So something doesn't make sense here. Okay. I can take their questions on face value and say, okay, we have a difference of opinion and we're just trying to maximize the amount of revenue to the state. Okay. I can give you the benefit of the doubt. Why did you take out reference to this particular project in HJR 18? If I'm going to do the mature thing and give you the benefit of the doubt that all you're talking about is an altruistic, I think that there needs to be, this is Senator Wielechowski speaking, I think that there needs to be more money coming from taxation from this project. Okay? Philosophically, that's where I'm at. Why do you vote to remove reference to this particular project in HJR 18? Why do you say we need to not point to this particular project? We need to telegraph that the legislature supports any project, a project. It's generic. It doesn't have to be this one. Why do you telegraph that? If it's only about money, you can support this project as long as the project goes forward with this dollar figure that you think is necessary. This is why it doesn't make sense to me. There's a disconnect. Those members sitting at that table there, with the exception of Rauscher and Myers, they voted to remove their support from this particular project. And now they want more tax money from it. So I don't believe, this is where it's challenging me as an honest person. I don't believe that the questions that are being asked are actually, I think it's a dog and pony show. That's what I think. I think as long as they can figure out what level that the project can theoretically go forward, that gives them leverage as to decide which direction they want to go. Do you want to scuttle the project? Do you want to kill it? Or do you want to let it go forward with maximum number of dollars that the state gets to collect? And whoever pays the price of that, we don't care. Remember, these people sitting at this table right here, every dollar that they raise in state revenue for this project is going to increase the cost of your gas bill. If it isn't a direct cost because of the additional taxation, then it'll be an indirect cost because of the litigation that happens or the additional cost for where they have to find the money. The investor that's going to invest is going to demand a higher return because there's higher risk, the risk of litigation. I'm finding it hard to believe that the members here at this table are actually taking this project seriously and actually want to see it go forward.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to slide 17.
All right. Again, Dan Stickle for the record. Slide 17 just touches on one of the comments earlier that the fiscal note itself is associated with just the revenue from just the alternative tax to the state. And so the fiscal note itself does not address the municipal revenues and then all of the other revenues associated with the project, including production tax, corporate tax, royalty revenue, and any property tax from associated development that is not directly part of the AKLNG project.
So a question, increased production tax. How will gas production tax, how will oil production tax increase with the deductions for gas production costs?
Sure, Senator.
So there's a left message here that says that they're going to use, that companies will use their deductions for the gas pipeline costs against the oil production. And so we'll have a reduction in the costs in the reduction in the amount of revenue that we get through the oil business, through the oil taxation. Okay. That's what the underlying current here is from my perspective, if I understand correctly.
Chair Giesel. So one of the assumptions in the analysis, which I'll get into later on in the presentation, is that there will be expanded oil development on the North Slope, in particular at Point Thompson. There will be hundreds of millions of barrels of additional oil condensate production that we assume will be unlocked at Point Thompson with a major gas sale that would not otherwise be produced. And so the net effect of that, after accounting for any impact of associated lease expenditures and tax credits, the impact of that is positive to the state through the life of the project to the tune of about $1.4 billion net positive to the state for oil production tax and an additional $8.6 billion of gas production tax.
Mr. Sickle, is that over the life of over what time period?
That's over life of project
Okay.
through 30 years of production.
Okay.
So the production tax becomes, there are some costs incurred, as these development costs are incurred. So there are a couple years of reductions to overall production tax revenue as the project is coming online. But I think by 2031 we expect it to be a net positive, and then from there on it's just a growing net positive.
Thank you. So the corporate income tax, you're expecting that will increase coming from Conoco and Exxon, since Hillcorp doesn't pay a corporate income tax and neither will Glenfarne.
Chair Giesel, without naming specific taxpayers, correct. So we assume that the midstream owner is not subject to corporate income tax, and we assume that the upstream companies are subject to corporate income tax to the extent that they currently are subject to that tax. So a portion of the incremental income pays corporate income tax, and then a portion does not. And it's roughly 2/3 pay corporate income tax for the upstream component.
Very good. Thank you. Other questions on this slide? All right, seeing none.
All right, so moving on to slide 18. So this table shows an estimate of the revenues from the alternative volumetric tax based on the spring forecast and our baseline AKLNG assumptions. So these are the numbers that go into the front of the fiscal note. For the state component, we've also extended this out through a 10-year time horizon and included each of the impacted municipalities. Fiscal year 31 through 33 represents a ramp-up period, with fiscal year 34 representing the first year of full revenue from full operations of the pipeline. We anticipate that calendar 33 is going to be the first full year of operations there. So at full operations, the state is expected to receive about $9 million per year from the alternative volumetric tax, municipalities receiving about $64 to $65 million per year.
Question, Senator Wielechowski.
If you didn't have an alternative volume tax and you just had the existing state property tax laws in place, what would you expect the numbers to be in 2035 for?
This should be a really easy answer for Dan Stickle. He misses a great opportunity because I understand what Senator Wielechowski is asking here. He wants to have a hypothetical question, a hypothetical conversation, but Dan's already helped draft a fiscal note that says under the current tax regime, zero. You get no money because the project doesn't move forward.
Total midstream AVT, state AVT, and
Sure.
total AVT impact.
Senator Wielechowski through the chair. So if you assume that the project goes forward without this bill in place, at full capacity, the total property tax would be about $497 million per year. And then with the AVT, it's about $64 million per year. Those are totals to the municipalities. And then the state would be additional to that.
Follow up, Senator Wielechowski.
What would the state be?
Senator Wielechowski through the chair. I don't have that number printed out in front of me. I could probably get it from a lifeline if you wanted that.
Yes, I would.
All right, which lifeline?
From Mr. Herbert. So we're looking for the 2035 state property tax from the gas line without the AVT.
Mr. Herbert?
Hello, this is David Herbert, Functional Analyst for the Department of Revenue. Could you repeat the question real quick?
Yes, Senator Wielechowski.
Thank you. I'm curious what the state property tax would be in 2035 under existing law instead of $9 million. What would it be under existing law?
I don't have that number, through the chair. I don't have that number right in front of me, but I can certainly prepare it for you.
Sure. And I'll just jump in. So yeah, apologies that we didn't have that exact number handy. So roughly the AVT is roughly equivalent to a 2 mills tax. So roughly the tax under current law would be about $90 million. And we will provide the exact breakout there.
Senator Wielechowski, further follow up?
I do. Follow up?
Yes, follow up.
And then do you anticipate the companies that are producing the pipeline or any of the producers to be able to use lease expenditures or take advantage of our current tax law to write off lease expenditure costs in the production of gas or in the production of gas incidental to oil or in production of pipelines delivering gas?
Senator Wielechowski through the chair. So we assume that the midstream operations of the AKLNG project are completely separate from the upstream. So a third party, and then those midstream costs of operating the pipeline has no impact on the upstream oil and gas production tax. For the upstream oil and gas production tax, we have detailed modeling of current tax law, and we do assume that any additional lease expenditures incurred for additional development on the North Slope would be allowed against the oil production tax as under current law. We also model out the impact of per taxable barrel credits and how the additional gas production tax impacts the application of those.
Senator Wielechowski.
Have you modeled that? Do you have those
Yes,
numbers?
Senator Wilkowski through the chair. Yes, that's modeled out, and that rolls up into some of the coming slides and the total production tax revenues that I mentioned earlier.
Very good. Senator Wilkowski.
Do you expect any costs in 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, but I guess before the production starts ramping up, do you expect any negative impact to the state treasury from the lease expenditure deductions?
Senator Wilkowski through the chair, yes. So we assume that there will be some temporary reductions to oil production tax as companies are investing in expanding production, in particular at Prudhoe Bay and Point Thompson. That is baked into the modeling. I think I have a chart coming up that shows the year-by-year impacts of that. And then again, by 2031, it becomes a net positive to the state.
Senator Rauscher, did you have questions?
I'm good now.
All right. Any further questions, Senator Wilkowski?
No.
All right. Seeing none, I'll let you move on.
All right. So slide 19 talks about expenditures associated with the fiscal note. So the way the alternative volumetric tax is set up, it would create a new tax type within the tax division. So there would be some additional costs. We are requesting one additional staff position to carry out the administration of this alternative volumetric tax. And then there would also be one-time costs for upgrading of our tax revenue management system to incorporate the new.
So that tax auditor, he doesn't get a raise for 6 years, if you believe the fiscal note.
Tax type.
Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure you've mentioned this before, but I'd like you to reiterate why do it this way? That is to say, why create a whole new type of tax and a whole new, system here with new employees? Why not use our existing tax system, property tax system, just drop the mill rate to the point where it's the equivalent in terms of dollar value to the producer?
So the listeners of Oversight Live can answer that question for Senator Dunbar, can't we?
Senator Dunbar, through the chair, that's a policy call. I don't know if Mr. Kissinger would want to opine on that.
I would, yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to hear Mr. Kissinger, although, to be honest, I'd like to hear what Mr. Kissinger has to say. But to me, he's not really the policymaker that should be making that recommendation because, I want to hear what he has to say first. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes. Mr. Kissinger, can you respond, please, to the question Senator Dunbar is asking?
Yes, this is Matt Kissinger for the record. Senator Dunbar through the chair. I think ultimately you achieve a greater level of alignment between the project and the municipalities this way, and the state itself, where increased throughput is a win for all. And that's not something that you generally achieve with the current statutes.
Senator Dunbar, follow up?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Could you explain what that means? I mean, what do you mean by alignment? The value of the property should be tied to the throughput in the sense that that's how you determine how much it's valued because it's producing a certain amount of profit. Why not use a system more similar to the one we have at TAPS?
Senator Dunbar through the chair. I think if you look at the history of TAPS, it's a history of litigation, whereas this would be a simpler approach that achieves the same means. And I'd say that the actual alignment is greater in this case because there's no argument around the value. It's simply all parties achieving a greater amount of throughput, all achieve a greater amount of payment.
Follow up, Senator Dunbar.
So one of the things we hit on before, and this might just be a drafting error, but the Department of Revenue modeled it this way, was as the throughput increases, as the years go by, it increases by 1%, but it's 1% of that 6 cents, right? It'd be much cleaner to just add a mill each year, right? 2 mil to 3 mil to 4 mil to 5 mil, everyone would sort of understand that. And you'd have 18 years of leeway till you got back to where we are now, 18 years after you hit the point where you're producing, in this case, a billion, but perhaps that'll get lowered back to 250 million. So do you need, assuming we keep this AVR system, would the project still go forward if that number were altered, not to 1%, but to whatever percentage equaled 1 mil? That is to say, it'd go from 6 cents to whatever number it is, 7 cents or 9 cents. Maybe it's a fraction of a cent, but not 0.0606, right? Which is such a fractional amount as to be irrelevant. So, Mr. Kissinger, does a project still go forward if we get the equivalent value to 1 additional mil per year after we're in full production?
Senator Dunbar, through the chair, the project goes forward when all the financing is in place, both the debt and the equity. And the more attractive that the project is to equity investors, the greater likelihood that the project will go forward. I don't think there is a sort of cut and dry, yes, it'll go forward with this, no, it will not go forward with that, to be honest. When we talk about this 1%, it should be understood that it is to approximate a level of inflative impacts. And so if you think that inflation averages somewhere between 2 and 2.5%, this would account for sort of 50% of the costs being subject to inflation. So it's an approximation more for inflation or the value of the dollar over time than anything else.
Follow up, Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, even by that logic, it seems like we should at least set it to inflation then, the average of inflation. But I think there's something else happening in the math. I'm trying to do it in my head about, because we're doing a fraction of a fraction. I think you end up with a smaller amount, but I'll leave it at that for now, Madam Chair. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Kissinger.
Thank you. Senator Myers.
Thank you. So, Mr. Stickle, you're anticipating needing 1 extra person to carry out the new type of tax. Let's say we left the taxes in place as they are and the project moved forward. This is a very large project, probably going to have a lot of paperwork involved. Would you, obviously, if there's no bill, there's no fiscal note, but would you be coming back to us in a couple of years asking for another person or 2 or 3 dedicated specifically to doing the property taxes on the gas line and associated facilities?
Senator Myers, to the chair, yes. The workload associated with doing a full assessment and appraisal of a project of this magnitude with the 3 major components and the associated infrastructure that would require additional staff. Our staff are stretched thin as it is. And so taking this on, given our existing staff load, would be extremely challenging.
Follow up, Senator Myers.
Yeah, just quick follow up. So I don't think we have Mr. Spanos on the line, but he'd probably be the best person to answer this. But just kind of a off the top of your head, I don't want to hold you to this in future years. Just a rough guess, how many extra people do you think that would mean?
Sure, Senator Myers, to the chair. So I know it would be at least 1. I think we would potentially be looking for maybe a couple.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on slide 19? See, Senator Dunbar.
And not a question, Madam Chair, just a comment. With other revenue bills, we often hear the counter argument that the implementation costs are too high, and so we shouldn't put forward this new tax. Here, the administration is putting forward a novel new tax, and they are rightly asking for more staff to implement it. But because they think it will help the project go forward and raise more money, we're willing to do that. And so I just think it's a good example. And for future revenue discussions, I hope we all keep that in mind. We have to pay for revenue, but it's sometimes worth doing if we want a new type of revenue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dunbar. All right, moving on then to slide 20.
All right. Slide 20 just shows the expenditures portion of our fiscal note. Again, for that one position, requesting about $170,000 per year, and then additionally a $250,000 one-time request for upgrading our IT systems to incorporate the new tax type.
That was your capital cost. It's IT costs. Got to have computer work done to update the computer system for the new tax.
Any questions on this?
Okay, fast forward a little bit.
All right, seeing none.
All right, and then the next section of the presentation gets into detailed project modeling. So starting with slide 22, so I have several sets of slides that kind of lay out the model structure and the assumptions that went into the model before going through the results themselves. So the DOR maintains a pretty in-depth gas line model. It's broken into two main components. So we have a midstream model that estimates the cash flows and revenues from the AKLNG project itself. So this includes the gas treatment plant, the gas pipeline, and then an LNG export facility. And then we have a separate upstream model that estimates the cash flows and revenues for the upstream producers, both for the gas production directly and then for any associated oil production and the related impacts there.
All right, no questions?
Slide 23. So our model is based on many assumptions, and this slide shows some of the sources for that. So the spring 2026 revenue forecast is used as kind of the baseline for our upstream assumptions, including oil prices, baseline company spending, baseline oil production. Our official forecast does not include AKLNG related project revenue. And so most of the project revenue, project assumptions have been developed in collaboration with AGDC, including some of the key assumptions like project cost, gas price, and what level of additional upstream development there would be with.
I do really want to get to this modeling, but understanding the data sources is something that we all need to see.
Right.
Slide 24. So our model covers 30 years of full project capacity or 32 years of LNG sales given the ramp up period. We assume that pipeline tolls will be set based on 20 years at full capacity, and we assume that there will be a 10% rate of return provided to the developer. That's an assumption. We have the ability to model higher and lower rates of return. But the way the modeling works is we look at the cost of the gas going into the project. We look at the cost of the project itself. We assume a 10% rate of return to the developer. And then we look at what is the delivered cost of gas that balances that out.
Do you think it's fair that a developer gets 10% rate of return? Or do you think the state should be saying, well, 10% is too much. We need to come off of 10% rate of return. We should expect that somebody's going to come in and do our project for us. We haven't been able to find anybody in a decade, but we think they should come in and be willing to do it for less than 10%. Think that's realistic? And Craig, I see your comment there about the costs. They're de minimis. They're rounding errors. $170,000 for one employee is, in the bigger scheme of things, not something to get wrapped around.
So we are assuming about a $46 billion total construction cost. That is in 2026 dollars. That's an assumption that was based on pre-Glenfarne estimates provided by AGDC back in 2023, and we've simply brought that up to 2026 base year based on inflation. We understand that there's uncertainty around that assumption, so we have quite a bit of sensitivity analysis so we can look at higher capital costs.
Questions on this slide, Senator Myers?
Yeah, thank you. Got a question for Mr. Kissinger.
Let's go back to that just a second. I want to show you something. So this right here, your financing terms, 5% interest rate, that's financing for your debt that is going to pay for the pipeline, right? So what is the cost? What happens if that 5% interest rate goes up to 5 and a quarter, or 5.5, or 6%? I don't even know what it would be. But if the project is riskier, that interest rate goes up. So what does that mean to the overall likelihood that the project is going to go forward, or the total cost of the project? We know we're asking the question about the construction costs, and we say, hey, there needs to be some sensitivity built into that, because we think 46 billion is too small of a number. We think that's actually going to be larger, maybe even double. I don't know. Okay. Well, the same forecasting or the same modeling needs to ask the question is, if the legislature doesn't take the actions that this bill is projecting, right? That's what this whole conversation over this bill is about. Does this 5% interest rate even hold true? What is the assumption if this goes up to 6%? Does the project remain feasible? Because if it's higher risk, you know that your financing terms are going to be different than what it is if it's lower risk. And that's a legitimate question that needs to be answered.
Higher capital costs.
Questions on this slide? Senator Myers.
Yeah, thank you. Got a question for Mr. Kissinger. Mr. Kissinger, if you're listening, my understanding is that Glenfarne has completed the feed study for the pipeline portion, but the feed study for the gas treatment plant and the LNG plant, liquefaction and export plant, are still ongoing. Is that correct?
This is Matt Kissinger for the record. Senator Myers to the chair. Yes, that is correct.
And then quick follow-up.
Yes, Senator Myers.
Thank you. So Mr. Stickles giving us a $46.2 billion construction cost estimate. Is that, without asking you to give away too much, is that something roughly in the general vicinity of what we're anticipating for the entire project, pipeline, treatment plant, LNG plant?
Senator Myers through the chair. Yes, it is. It still is within the range of what we consider reasonable for this. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's no way that they're going to, at this point, with what's happening in the legislature, I doubt there's any effort going towards feed, front-end engineering and development on anything but the pipeline at this point. Because if you can't get the pipeline through because of the legislative inaction or action that scuttles the project, then you don't need to be spending money. We're never going to get our money back if we spend it on front-end engineering and design on the components that are in phase 2 or phase 3 of the project. So none of that's happening until we get an agreement here and move forward with the building of the pipeline.
Other questions? So go ahead, Senator Wilkowski.
Just on that number has AGDC or anyone suggested that the number might be different than 46.2 billion? Because I've heard different numbers thrown out. I've heard maybe 57 billion. I've heard 60 billion. What's your latest best estimate of what it will be?
Senator Wilkowski through the chair. I don't believe that you've heard any of those other numbers from the project. I think maybe others have opined or perhaps speculated or just wanted to throw a number out there. The number that we have carried has been 44 billion, which is now inflation adjusted to 46 billion. And it roughly aligns with what we've seen out of the class 2 cost estimate for the pipeline. Granted, again, there is cost overrun risk. And so we've moved from a class 4 cost estimate to a class 2 cost estimate on the pipeline, which narrows down your cost overrun risk, but does not eliminate it, obviously.
Senator Wilkowski.
So your class 2 cost estimate, as you sit here, is $46.2 billion as of today.
Senator Wilkowski through the chair. Glenfarne, as you know, have made the updated feed estimates confidential, and we're keeping that confidential. But the number that we have carried forward, which is the 2019 number corrected up to 2023 through inflation adjustment, it's, as I said, still within the range of what's reasonable. Based on what we have seen out of that class 2 cost estimate.
Follow up, Senator Wilkowski.
So then thank you. The IRR 10% pre-tax tolling, is that, I'm just curious how that compares to like in-state rates of return for gas lines and Star. I think they've got an 11.8% rate of return, a return on equity. I'm curious how it compares to NSTAR and how it compares to rates of return or internal rates in other projects.
Senator Wilkowski, through the chair. If I have looked at a range of published rates on pipelines or published returns that have been approved on pipelines, I think the sort of 10 to 12% after tax, a 12% pre-tax or 10% after tax would probably be something that would stand out as reasonable.
Follow up, Senator
Say that
Wilkowski.
again. So here it says total value set by requiring internal or equity return IRR of 10% pre-tax. Are you saying that's accurate, or are you saying it should be 12%? Is more likely.
Senator Wilkowski, through the chair. Again, so this would really depend on the strength of the contracts that the project is wrapped in as you go into your project finance. And so if you had very, very strong contracts for the vast majority of the volumes, which of course you've heard from Glen Farm that they're seeking to get 16 million tons out of the total 20 million tons under these long-term contracts with creditworthy buyers, then you can go lower on that. And the more you de-risk your cost overrun risk, the lower you can go with that number. But again, we're kind of going into uncharted territories here. Once we get the debt in place and we start raising the capital, it'll be up to the developer to demonstrate to the other investors that it's a reasonable return that they're getting for the risk that they're taking. This is the cost of capital benefit of going to a developer over the producers, though.
All right. No further follow-up, Senator Wilkowski. So I'll just make a comment. Mr. Kissinger, a member of your team, spoke to a public group on Friday and cited $57 billion as the more likely cost of the project. Just letting you know where that question originated. So no other questions on slide 24. So we'll move on to slide 25.
So I'm sorry, but did I hear you say Matt Kissinger said that?
No, I said a member of your team said that.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Senator Myers.
Yeah, I'd just be curious to know who that was and when, at what meeting.
There was a small public meeting on Friday at which Mr. Begich was a guest speaker.
Okay.
So, Mr. Stickle, we're on to slide 25 now.
All right. Again, Dan Stickle for the record. Slide 25 details some of the upstream assumptions that go into the modeling. So we assume a gas purchase price of $1.50 per 1,000 cubic feet.
Still haven't gotten to the modeling.
That was based on advice from AGDC. Again, that is another one of the major assumptions, along with the capital cost with some uncertainty around it. So we provide sensitivity analysis around various gas purchase prices. For our initial phase one production, we assume a gas source that is not Prudhoe Bay or Point Thompson.
Okay. We're going to fast forward just a little bit, and if we need to come back, we will.
Other sources, but there are additional state benefits from adding the gas production on top of the oil production will not change the oil production profile at Prudhoe Bay from what's in the official revenue forecast.
Thank you very much.
Senator Wilkowski.
I'm just curious about the yet to find gas, because I can't recall seeing that reflected in previous fiscal notes. Is that when modeling previous gas line proposals has the department included yet to find gas?
Let's get to the modeling.
Have the producers said from them? Not
see and ask for that document.
Yeah, Chair Giesel, I believe the document is publicly available. We'd be happy
Thank
to
you.
provide that.
Senator Dunbar will do that.
Question.
Yes, Senator Clayman.
And we're actually talking about a document from when BP still was here, which was 10 plus years ago.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. I'm just making
When
sure.
Hillcork.
These guys do not want to give up on a project that couldn't go forward. I find it comical. They're living in La La
came in and
Land.
Took over North Slope.
Let's get to the
Their
modeling.
field.
This guy's
I think there was hope that they could anchor the beginning of the project. There's some uncertainty around that. So I know some other fields have been discussed as potential sources as well.
Very good. So I've heard that statement also, that they were planning to be producing gas, and they made a comment.
Go as a department and take a look at. So we do have a prevailing value for North Slope gas. Currently, that's based on sales to utilities. And basically, when a company sells gas, they pay a higher of their sales price or the prevailing value. We would need to look at whether any sales into the pipeline should be included in that prevailing value calculation or not. That's not a determination we can make yet, as it would be a hypothetical. Broadly speaking, a Department of Revenue would need to implement regulations around gas pricing, regardless if the AKLNG project goes forward. So there's some uncertainty around that we would want to kind of tighten up in regulation so that everyone knows exactly how we'd be valuing that for tax purposes.
Very good. That's good to know. Senator Myers.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. So question for Mr. Kissinger. So Mr. Kissinger, we've got on here phase 1 production from Great Bear Pantheon or somebody else. My understanding from information that was shared last year was that the Great Bear Pantheon field, while small, was attractive to begin phase 1 because it had extremely low CO2, and then it was effectively utility grade without any sort of treatment. But since then, Great Bear has run into problems. They don't have a confirmed resource ready to come out of the ground. If we went ahead with phase 1 and we're trying to deliver gas to Fairbanks and South Central in 2020.
There's far more than enough gas for phase 1. There's zero and a dollar. They begin Henry Hub to go. We have.
We want to get to the modeling, folks.
Phase 1 is
the liquids that they're looking for, eventual price.
Assume that some, but not all, of the upstream owners pay corporate income tax in line with the current situation. Production tax is modeled under our current production tax law for gas tax impacts of the project.
All right. I see no questions. Slide 29.
Slide 27, if I could.
Okay. Yep.
Pardon me. Did I skip? Pardon me. Sorry.
Touches on our assumption that there is a gas line in place. Slide 28 touches on the two scenarios that we've modeled. So we have a current law scenario, which assumes the project would go forward under
current law and proposed scenario.
Just to show what key outputs.
Okay.
Again, no
I'm
questions.
I'm off the mouse.
Right. So slide
Sorry,
29
folks.
starts to get into some of the outputs of the modeling. So this slide summarizes key outputs over 10, 20, and 30 years of full project production under current law and our the bill in front of the committee. So through 2062, actually this is just under current law and our baseline assumption. So assuming the project went forward under current law without any tax changes, there would be $29.7 billion of state revenues over life of project, $22.6 billion of federal revenues, $17.3 billion of municipal revenues. There would be a little over $60 billion of revenues to the upstream owners and a little over $70 billion of revenues to the midstream owners. Now, keeping in mind that those are, for the upstream and midstream, those are the cash flow revenues. So those are gross revenues, not profits, net of costs. In terms of cost of supply, our baseline assumption results in a 2033 price of $4.86 per thousand cubic feet for in-state sales and $9.07 per thousand cubic feet for LNG sales. These would be the break-even sales prices for the gas sold to the utilities. The price paid by the end consumers would be a little bit higher.
No questions.
And then slide 30 shows a chart of those annual state revenues under the current law analysis. There would be a little over $200 million per year. These are just the state revenues. Over $200 million a year of property tax paid to the state, and another $600 million per year of royalties and corporate income tax. About $1 billion of state revenue total under the current law scenario with the production tax added. One thing to note here is you will note a little dip there in 2038 and say, what's going on there? So that represents some one-time impacts of some additional spending at Point Thompson. So we're expecting that there would be an initial outlay of capital and then some additional outlay of capital in 2038. And to some of the questions earlier, you do see for the first few years of production, there are some negative production tax revenues, and then those turn very positive once the project gets to full output.
Senator Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll ask this now, just in case we run out of time. The same question would apply on slide 32 under the proposed legislation, because it doesn't seem to change unless we alter the proposed legislation. So that year 2028 and 2030, when the revenue to the state is negative in the near term, when we are sort of desperate for funds, how, Mr. Stickle, how do we avoid that? That is to say, we've got these huge profits in the out years. How do we shift those into the out years? So we'll get slightly less tax revenue in the out years, but we will prevent ourselves from going negative in those 2 years. That is, we will shift the risk. It'll be sort of borne by everyone rather than Alaska assuming that risk. And by the way, losing short-term dollars that are very precious right now because the gas and increased oil and other projects hasn't started flowing. So how do we take that slight negative, push it out into the future when we will have more revenues flowing?
Sure, Senator Dunbar through the chair. So there would be a variety of policy levers that could be implemented there. The reduction in state revenues for those couple years, which again, it's really only 2029 and 2030 that we're showing a net reduction in state revenues. It becomes a net positive starting in 2031. It would be various levers related to the oil and gas production tax.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
So I'll say, yeah, it's not a ton of money. And so I don't think that there should be any opposition from the folks who would have to forego it for a little while when we've got these huge profits coming. But it matters to us because we're in deficit, or we're sometimes in deficit these days when there isn't a war going on. What would be the most efficient way for us to shift those costs? I know there are a variety of policy levers. What would be the most efficient way to shift those costs into the out years?
Sure, Senator Dunbar through the chair. So I'm not sure if I would be able to identify the most efficient way, and there's different ways of defining efficiency. Some of the interactions there, minimum tax floor is one of the levers, per taxable barrel credits and how those apply against the oil tax and the gas tax and where those apply in the calculation.
All right, I gotta jump in here for just a second. Senator Dunbar is falling into the socialist trap, or I shouldn't say socialist, the pro-government spending trap, pro-taxation trap. You set a policy, you put some kind of statute in place that says this is going to be our policy for tax, and then it goes forward, and then something changes within industry, or somebody uses the law to their advantage, or whatever they're doing, whatever happens into the future, and you don't get what you thought you were going to get, and therefore you go changing the tax again. That's what he's talking about. How do we change something so that we get our money and the company doesn't get to take the deduction or whatever it is where they're paying less in taxes because we need their tax money. Okay. We'll even forego future tax money to make sure that we have their tax money now. But once we have their tax money, then we could also recognize that we're losing money that we probably could have had in the past if we hadn't made the changes. And so we can make the changes back again, right? Because now we're foregoing money that we should need or should have and we need for state spending, right? And so there's this seesaw effect where you're trying to, the playground sawhorse effect, right? Where you're just bouncing back and forth because your goal is not a stable tax regime. Your goal is making sure that you've got enough money. And you don't balance other things like your spending, your appetite. You balance how much money you can get from people. And therefore you set this regime and the whole industry and the whole state and all the private sector and all the players that are involved with paying the taxes, they don't know what to predict from year to year. And so why would companies come into the state and operate in a regime like that where you can't trust that the legislature is going to keep set taxes and leave them alone? Set good policy and then leave it alone. It just increases risk. So in one hand, he's asking the question, how can we reduce the risk? And the very thing that you want to do, which is adjust your policies now, you're going to want to adjust them in future years too. When you come up with a good argument for why we shouldn't be foregoing this revenue. Anyway, let's get to the.
And then the deduction of lease expenditures. Those are kind of the fact.
It was kind of starting to. You familiarly one.
That little dip that seems
series of dark.
Okay, where is the rest of the?
About how much?
So
These are good questions, but I want to see the modeling.
Guesstimate
because we're running out of time tonight. We can come back and listen to the rest of this if we need to.
89 million when in fact.
Looking at slide 30, that's under current law. And you see the high bars going up to $1 billion in state revenues. But if you look ahead to slide 32, that's what it looks like under the proposed law. Now, just sticking with the current law, as I look at this graph, and we've seen this graph many times with oil development, right? Companies investing and then production comes online and their profits increase, and they show a piece of it in the graph that is the state's revenue. What would be interesting, of course, is to see what the Glenfarne profit graph looks like, because that isn't reflected here. This is only talking about state revenues. I would wonder what the profits are to Glenfarne that interests them so much in being in the middleman for this project. But clearly that is not available to us. Are there any other questions on slide 30? Yes, Senator Clayman.
If I'm looking at slide 30 and slide 32, and I'm just looking at the royalties and the production taxes, which I believe on both are the top bars. The lighter blue on the top is production tax. The gray underneath that is the royalties. If we had the exact numbers, would those be the same amount of royalties and production tax in each year on these two graphs? Or is there a distinction between the royalty volume and the production tax payments in these two different estimates?
Sure. Senator Clayman through the chair. So the royalty and production tax should be the same. So again, our assumption is that the midstream project is by the third-party developer and completely independent of the upstream. And so we're assuming the same price and the same volumes to the upstream producer, and so then the same royalties and production tax.
Follow up.
Is there any analysis? I know one of the suggestions that's been made, at least by other presenters, is that we don't even get the project if we don't give the property tax reduction. So is there, and it's effectively slide 30 is assuming we get the we get the project even if we don't do the property tax. Is there any analysis that's trying to look at different levels of property tax and how that impacts royalties and production taxes?
No, they didn't model that.
Senator Clayman through the chair. So we do present, we present the total royalties and production taxes that we're assuming for upstream. One could, compare the royalties. If you assume that the project would not go forward without the tax relief, then those total revenues would be a delta. But again, we assume we're laying out this current loss scenario as a baseline and assume that the same amount of gas would be produced and that the same price would be paid to the upstream. So those royalties and production tax revenues wouldn't change. So we're not touching the upstream tax at all with Senate Bill 280. We're only touching the tax on the midstream, and the property tax relief does not extend to upstream oil and gas property.
We are at 5 o'clock, but we're really at the core of the presentation.
Okay, so we're gonna end that conversation there. They're gonna bring this up on the next meeting, folks. Really key to the decisions that committee has to make is Senator Giesel's statement about, boy, I sure would like to see the profits that Glenfarne's going to make. Because the root of that, the peel back the onion, why are we saying that? Because we don't trust that Glenfarne, if we reduce the tax burden on this project, we don't trust that Glenfarne's not going to get more fair treatment, meaning they can adjust their profits and they can take less in profits so that we can take more in taxes. This lady here cannot be Republican. There's nothing that she's talking about with regard to fiscal policy that has anything to do with Republican. She's a liar. It is a travesty that she's chairing this meeting and has the power and control that she has over this process. The root of this is envy. It's greed. It's envy. Who is she to question whether Glenfarne is going to have more an appropriate amount of profit? Who is she? They're the ones that have raised their hand and said, hey, we'll take on the burden and do this project. You want a project? You want a gas line? We'll do it. Who are you to question what kind of profit we get? You want to question that? We'll go find somebody else. She's being greedy. I don't want this company because they're going to make too much money. I want a company to do this for me, and I want them to make less money. I want more money out of this. It's greed. It's envy that they would be successful at doing what they're doing, that we've asked them to do. And she's got to have this attitude that, well, we need to know what Glenfarne's going to make, what profit they're going to make. Before we can make good decisions, we need to know what they're going to make. Because if they're going to make too much, then we're going to take more of it. This isn't a fiscal lever problem. This isn't a fiscal policy problem. This is a greed problem. This is envy on other people being successful. And it's sad that the state of Alaska is in a position where a woman, a legislator, has got this problem with her own internal clock and her own internal thing where it's affecting state policy. They should have this should not even be factoring into the conversation. You asked them through AGDC. You told AGDC, go find somebody to build a pipeline. They found somebody to build a pipeline, and now you're not happy with how much profit they're going to get? You don't want a pipeline bad enough then. Goes back to my thinking here. We've got to find an excuse to scuttle this project. or excuses. You got an alternative to Glenfarne, and Glenfarne, whatever Glenfarne can eke out in profit. If they do really good at their job and they get more profit, the state should be upset and get more in taxes. This is nonsense. You don't like how Glenfarne's going to do it? Then find yourself a different company. Build the pipeline yourself. Go find a different company to build the pipeline. You don't have that. These people keep throwing up they keep throwing up numbers and concepts from 10 years ago when other companies who declined to move forward in the project had conversations and said, hey, this is what we could do and blah, whatever. None of that matters. None of that is even feasible. If you think that that's what you would prefer because you like those numbers better, then go find that company. Tell Glenfarne, say, sorry, no, thank you. We don't want you anymore. We want that other company, that some other company out there to do it how we want it. You don't have that. That's not an option for you. What you have is Glenfarne or nothing, because you don't have an alternative. If you've got an alternative, then show it. Otherwise, get a hold of your greed, get a hold of your envy, and help this project go forward, because it's the only project that you've got. It's the only thing that's going to get us natural gas from the North Slope now. Not because Glenfarne's anything special. It's because Glenfarne is the only one that said yes. Barring a second that says yes and has got the money to back it up, and the credibility and the skill and the relationships and all that, there's a comparable Glenfarne out there. Barring that you have that, this is it. You're either going to decide to hitch your wagon to this horse or not. And I'm of the opinion, I'm 90% sure that these people here, with maybe the exception of Dunbar. Dunbar's asking some questions that leads me to think that he's actually trying to find some solutions here. Senator Giesel and Senator Wilkowski, I think, are playing a different game. I think they're playing a different game altogether. All right. We're going to come back to this because Senate Resources is going to be the place where this is happening. These conversations are probably going to go on all week, and we're going to be right there to bring it to you, because if there's one thing that would help the economy of the state of Alaska, it is getting out of the way and enabling this pipeline to get built and prove all of the naysayers wrong, that it can't be done. It's too expensive, blah, 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 blah. All of that may still be true, but you don't stand in the way and say that, well, it may be true. It's fear and it's scary and you'll never make it happen. So get out of the way and help them make it happen. Anyway, folks, we've been here for almost 2.5 hours now. It's been a good 2.5 hours. I've learned a lot. I hope you've learned a lot. If you got questions, shoot me an email. Dean asks from Facebook land, thanks for joining us, Dean. Why hasn't another legislator called her out? Because that's not how the Senate does it. The Senate's not going to play games like that. That's how the House operates. No matter what we feel or think, it seems the bottom line is no property tax break, no deal. I don't know that for sure. I don't know that for sure, Dean. What I'm hearing from Glenfarne, from other meetings, is that in order to get the lowest cost gas, the volumetric tax is the way to go. Not because it reduces the tax burden on Glenfarne or because it's less tax from the project to the state, because it helps reduce the risk of the project. That's the benefit to the project. Yes, paying less in taxes is what Glenfarne would prefer. Yes, the state wants to have more taxes, or at least some of them do, right? I got it. I understand that. The volumetric tax, the shift there, takes away the risk of lawsuits over the bureaucratic assessments of property value and what that means with regard to increased risk over the costs of the project long term. Because it's not just a valuation today of the property value and then there's never a lawsuit again. It is a valuation, a critique of valuation every time there's a reevaluation. So those lawsuits cause there to be cost going forward into the project. So you can do away with all of that risk and all of that cost by going to a volumetric tax. That's the beauty of the volumetric tax. It's why it reduced the cost. So if your low cost money, the 5% money that we were talking about on that other slide, the interest that you have to pay, that's with one set of lenders with a project that is risked at a certain level. If the legislature acts or doesn't act and causes the risk to go up, then you have to go to somebody else, or if it's the same person, because your risk is higher, your cost will be higher. And that ultimately leads to higher cost gas to us. So it all goes back to this nonsense that this committee is playing, that the only valuation that they're considering here is the amount of money that can come to the state through the tax. It's very clear they want to increase that to right to that threshold that says we don't want a project or we're asking too much, right? And we're going to force the project to end. Okay, if you take them at their word, that's the threshold they want to find. The value of the project is in providing the state of Alaska and the economy, the Alaskans, gas. Finding a way to figure that out. Icing on the cake is that you get revenue to the state. If you take that mindset, and I think that is a healthy mindset for the state of Alaska, for the legislature, then you do what's necessary to get the pipeline built and an economy booming, and then you address revenue. You want a growing economy. You want a state government that can be supported by a private sector economy. That's what healthy is. They're not thinking about that. All they're thinking about is how much money we can get to the state coffers. That is all they're thinking about. Or they have ulterior motives. I like your thinking here, Craig. The most efficient way to shift the state losses is for the state to spend less. You're absolutely right. Those graphs were like, hey, there's a year we're not going to have as much revenue. Okay, well, we better save some money between now and then because we know we're going to be out. Or let's get more efficient so that it doesn't hurt us as bad. I mean, those are conversations that responsible policymakers should be bringing up and should be executing. It's not, how can we change our tax laws to make sure that we get as much revenue as we need this year, because we've got the power to do that as a legislature. And it's short-sighted. It's not even understanding what you're doing to your economy, to people who are making decisions based on what they thought was going to be a long-term tax policy within a state. You're messing things up. You're messing with things that you don't even understand. Set your tax rate and let it go. Anyway, we got to run. We'll be able to continue this conversation tomorrow or I think there's should be a Senate resources meeting scheduled every day this week. I didn't double check it before I came on air here. But I'm pretty sure that's the case. Anyway, whenever the next Senate resources meeting is, if they're talking about this bill, then we'll be here to follow along because it's that important. Anyway, want you all to have a good night and drop me a question in the email if you have one. we'll address it in the next show. Thanks all for your participation. We'll see you tomorrow night.